The Strategy of Information with Nick Inglis, on infogov.net. On today's The Strategy of Information, Nick Inglis talks with Rafael Moscatel, best-selling author, information professional, and expert of compliance and privacy. In this wide-reaching conversation, Nick and Rafael talk about everything from supply chain improvement to collegiate baseball in the 1950s. Stay tuned for an incredible conversation as we explore the best-selling author's latest book, his career, and he sits down for our On the Spot segment. It's a wild conversation with Rafael Moscatel on today's episode of The Strategy of Information with Nick Inglis, on infogov.net.
Sometimes it's difficult to peer out into the future and make educated decisions. We always want to anticipate future change, but the fact is, as humans, we are not all that great with predictions. While predictions often fail, there is a strategy for your crystal ball, but one that involves a lot less guesswork. Since all technology adoption is on a bell curve, we can often look at those early adopters, the very early adopters, the change catalysts, the drivers who are on the front of the wave of adoption, and learn from them. Our next guest has done just that. And in his incredible new best-selling book, Tomorrow's Jobs Today, we get to be a fly on that wall to some incredible conversations with people who are living today in the world that the rest of us will soon catch up with. Our author, Rafael Moscatel, along with his wife, Abby Moscatel, deliver on some of the most fascinating conversations, all within the pages of this new bestseller. It's my honor to welcome to the Strategy of Information, the great Rafael Moscatel. Rafael, welcome to the Strategy of Information. We go back a bit on the conference circuit. Your background is in the information space. You've been Director of Information Management for Paramount Pictures. You were later the Director of Information Governance for Farmers Insurance. You've had these high-profile roles in the profession, and today you are the Director of Privacy Compliance at CAP, Compliance and Privacy Partners, strategic advisor to the Fortune 500, doing some really incredible work. And, you are a person who is deeply respected within the information community. You've got this incredible new book, Tomorrow's Jobs Today, that you've authored with your wife, Abby. And it's great. I was fortunate enough to get an advanced copy of this and say some nice words about the book in the book jacket, and I really love this book, Rafael. Its format's fun. It's got a unique interview with some really incredible people, sort of on the fringes, the edges of work, who are pushing us into our collective futures, whatever that future may end up looking like. You've broken the book down into these three sections, and they're gaps are opportunities, less is more, and relationships matter. And these seem so simple, and yet it's this framing that you use to talk about everything from the application of blockchain in financial transactions with rural farmers across the world, through to the future of executive job placement and changes happening in that field that and their impact on all of us. In that closing chapter called Finding Genuine Talent in the Artificial World, this book spans a lot of future-looking topics, from AI, big data, blockchain, Internet of Things, IoT, privacy, so much more. Back to those first starting sections, those section titles, and we're going to start with the gaps or opportunities. In interviewing, so many incredible people and authoring this book, what does gaps or opportunities mean to you today? And did your understanding change as you were writing the book?
Well, first of all, thank you for the introduction. Yes, this has been a great education for me, as well as my partner, my wife as well. She's an attorney at State Farm, and immersing ourselves in these technologies has been quite an uphill climb. I've always kind of been in the space, been in information management, more on the best practices side, but I had a lot of fear around technology as well. I still do to some degree. Always find myself trying to catch up, understanding certain concepts. And so, the book in a way helped kind of bring us up to speed on a lot of technologies, which by the time we finished the book had already moved, light years ahead. But no, as you said, we covered blockchain and AI, big data, and these concepts, the first one being gaps or opportunities, started to bubble up through the interviews that we began to have. The first one being with Ashish Gadnis of BankU, which leverages blockchain for something that people aren't probably used to, which is supply chain economics. And in each of these stories, we started noticing people understanding the silver lining, putting a positive spin on things, on their profession. And as we have the convergence of these technologies and regulatory rules and environments, it seems to be kind of this intersection where we can either go this way or we can go that way. And those who see the gaps as opportunities, kind of in a traditional sense, when you're thinking about internal audit or compliance, are really the ones that are kind of advancing and succeeding, versus the ones who are just too critical and not seeing the opportunity in a bad situation.
Yeah, and you really hook your readers right from the get-go with that interview with Ashish Gadnis, which is probably one of the most interesting and inspiring stories on the application of technology and really changing people's lives. I mean, the people that he is working with, these rural farmers, have literally had their lives improved through the use of technology. Do you want to share a little of that story with our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So, I had met Ashish Gadnis at an information management conference, and the book comes out of meeting some of these innovators at some of the conferences that you've hosted, at some of the conferences that I've been to just over the years and spoken to. And Ashish just kind of set the room on fire one day. It was in Chicago. And I called my wife. I was so excited about it. I said, you got to hear this guy's story. He's taking this technology, and instead of doing crypto or something kind of self-serving with it, he's using it to provide economic identity to rural farmers and women farmers in Ghana and Zambia and just, these places. And in fact, now he's working, I believe, with Coca-Cola to help, individuals in the United States. But basically, it allows you to, through the use of an SMS phone, so you don't even have to have an iPhone or something expensive, to really be part of the supply chain. And if you're collecting cacao or some type of raw material, before this technology, it was kind of up to the people that you were trading with to give you a fair market value for your materials. And what this does now is allows them to become part of the supply chain. And what Ashish Gadnis has done is he has taken the initiative of the step of going to the company, whether it's Mars Corporation or Coca-Cola, and gotten them on board so that he kind of covers it from both ends. So those middlemen who would normally take advantage of those impoverished people kind of are on notice, because now you can see the transaction history and you can see the flow of materials all the way through. He has struck a deal with the United Nations where he's also doing this. And again, it's just empowering these individuals to have an economic identity, even in the times of war, or if they have to move in the event of civil war or some type of unfortunate activity. As they move from region to region, if they're forced to, they're able to kind of pick up and get started and say, hey, I used to be a farmer. I used to do this or that. And so it's really inspiring. And it came out of his own career as a very poor child in India, really struggling in a terrible way, and from hunger and poverty, and wanting to give back to the world.
And he certainly has. It's a really inspiring story, and a really solid interview that you did with him. You really cut to the chase of his story, and you bubble up these incredible ideas, all based around this cutting edge technology. Some of the other gaps that you discuss in the book with leaders who are working to take advantage of those opportunities include things like the ethical application of AI. With Priya, sorry, her last name is Keshav. Yes, of Meridata and data flows, and what I've heard called data orchestration, and an incredibly interesting conversation with Dr. Angalo of the International Criminal Court, and so many other great conversations, all encompassed within the first part of this book, not even all three. There seems to be some common threads amongst these interviews, despite the wide application of the opportunities that they're all taking advantage of in different ways. All these folks seem to have found those gaps at the edges of their industries. Can you speak a bit to finding opportunity gaps? Did you see any commonalities that you discovered in those conversations about how people were identifying these gaps, these opportunities?
So our book, Nick, is part kind of subject matter expertise, and then the other half of it is kind of professional guidance and best practices in terms of your career and your career trajectory. We came out of the reason we had the gaps or opportunities theme come to light. We had this going into the book a little bit, but it also came out as maybe we'll talk about some of the other themes. But I had heard a story while I was kind of brainstorming for this book from my brother-in-law, who has a grandfather, and after World War I, he was coming back from the war. He stopped off in San Francisco. They dropped him, and he was supposed to go back to Boston. And I write about this in the book that
Love
he
this
became
story.
inebriated. Yeah, he became inebriated on the car, and in the caboose, got in an argument with a few other soldiers, and he only had a few bucks in his pocket. And they picked him up and they threw him off the train, and he ended up somewhere outside of Albuquerque. And he started walking down the road. Back then, no gas stations really, just kind of an empty landscape. And as he would walk, he would see a broken down Ford or a broken down Chevy, and in between these, he kind of started sobering up. And when he got to Albuquerque, he decided, rather than put his mind together and go back to Boston, he was going to use what he had left to put a down payment on a pickup truck. And he went back to each of those jalopies, picked them up, hitched them to the back of the tow truck, and towed them to a yard. And then, within 15 years, he ended up becoming the largest scrap metal salesman in Albuquerque, which is actually a very lucrative job. He founded or helped fund, educational institutions, everything. It's a tremendous success story, but we thought about it in terms of those cars, because in between those cars were gaps, and those were moments where he discovered that opportunity. And we find the same thing with some of these other individuals. I think, as you said, we had Dr. Anand Rayo, who is from PricewaterhouseCoopers, a brilliant AI visionary and scientist, but he talks to us about a little bit of the mundane back office, things that occur, or processes, which PwC and himself, they start with those gaps in processes, those inefficiencies, and then they build out these incredible solutions. So there was that, and we also talked to, in this chapter I'm just looking at, we talked to Priya in terms of IoT. We talked to a CIO of a smart city named Kevin Gray.
That was a fun
also
one.
Looking at the same kind of gaps in his city program, in his smart city program, and working with those different departments and helping bridge those gaps and those inefficiencies.
I loved his perspective. He's not the typical, city IT person. His background is not in government, and he comes in with these fresh ideas, and it was a really interesting conversation there. Chapter 8 of Tomorrow's Jobs Today, and listeners, if you have not picked up a copy of this, go ahead and get yourself a copy. Find it at your local independent bookseller or wherever you buy books. But in Chapter 8, you're discussing digital ethics and privacy with Dr. Ania Allen of the University of Pennsylvania. And you start that conversation with a quote from her, which I'm just going to say the quote aloud for the listeners, which is, for me, trust has to be earned. It's not something that can be demanded or pulled out of a drawer and handed over. And the more government or the business sector shows genuine regard and respect for people's privacy in their actions, as well as in their word and policies, the more that trust will come into being. And I love that framing from that quote there. And I know that this is a personal passion of yours, Rafael, in addition to being one of the subjects that's in the book, Tomorrow's Jobs Today. I've heard you speak on the subject previously brilliantly. Can you talk for a moment about that conversation around trust and privacy?
Right. I mean, this is the issue of the day, right, Nick? It's privacy, and on the one hand, it's being exploited. On the other hand, you think, gosh, they're cracking down on folks. Amazon is set to face one of the biggest GDPR fines in history. But what's really occurring here? I mean, it's social, it's financial. There's so many aspects to privacy, what it means. I like the interview with Dr. Allen probably the most in this particular section, because she takes us all the way back to the writing of the Constitution. That this is kind of, privacy is built into our structure, built into our DNA. But now with the new technology, it feels like we're struggling with this in a lot of ways. But in terms of the principles, things are very much the same as they've always been.
I loved that.
Yeah, we're always kind of dealing. Nothing really brings out kind of humanity more than this particular concept of privacy. And I've had my own personal, experiences with it as well. Now, where we almost are forced to have public personalities, are forced to have public brands. A lot of people shy away from that, but it's something you almost have to do as you move forward with your career. Dr. Allen's been very lucky, and she's worked obviously very hard. She's an attorney, but also a privacy specialist. Wrote, I believe, the first real case book on privacy law. And I saw her speak in Brussels at the 40th International Conference of Regulators, where I attended with my wife. And she stunned the audience with some of the comments she made there. And what you quoted was a follow-up to some notes she made at the Aspen Institute about privacy. She does believe that the new generation is going to embrace this, is going to kind of turn things around. But it's an ethical conversation. It's not just about our credit card numbers. Yeah. And until we get that, it's not really going to be absorbed in the full body politic.
Yeah, and I love that she went back into history to talk about the understandings that we have around privacy as she's talking about their application in these forward-thinking technologies at the edges of, our futures. I found her comments really interesting and really mirrored a conversation that we had on this show with Dr. Ann Kavukian, who's another privacy expert out there. They're weaving the two views together. I thought really gave a beautiful picture there. Moving forward through the book, and I'm just going to ask you questions from front cover to back cover. Moving to chapter 10, you talk with a friend of mine as well, Dr. Uli Kampfmeyer of Project Consult in Hamburg, Germany. And this truly is, a global book. You have global perspectives throughout it. And he imparts some sage advice at the end of that. God, his conversation with you is so wide-ranging. You talk about everything from early information systems for archaeologists through to the impact of GDPR on privacy in Europe in what is a very quick chapter, but has so much depth. Dr. Kampfmeyer takes on all those diverse subjects and boils them down beautifully, and I'll quote him here as well. Education on information management is lagging behind the technology and information revolution. Learn to think by yourself, learn languages, learn how to communicate, learn methodologies, learn philosophy, learn to adopt change, learn not to stop learning throughout your life. Study something which is of real interest to you, what you live, which gives you intellectual satisfaction. So Kampfmeyer, after talking about all these weighty topics, these hard topics, he then points to soft skills and knowledge as that which we should acquire. What are your thoughts on the impact of learning and passion on careers?
So, Dr. Kampfmeyer started off with a PhD in prehistory at the University of Göttingen. I'm probably messing that up, Nick. But he began there. Then he began looking at ECM systems to classify artifacts and how he was structuring them. He evolved with the process. He's a perfect example of what we're talking about in the book, which is not necessarily coming from this background. And that's not to say that you're going to just turn open a book and be able to write Python and start transforming AI. But there are pieces of your past, of your history, and the passion that you bring that are necessary for these technologies. And in fact, some of the younger audience, or the younger generation that is driving a lot of this change, driving a lot of this technology, and Andrea Callis of Paramount talks a little bit about this, but they're receptive to that because an older generation or an older group brings a lot of wisdom, and that is just kind of maybe not as present with a newer group, but the newer groups embrace it. And then technology is great when you have the full strata of society across ethnic groups, across ages, working together to build those kind of ethical solutions. Dr. Ulrich is a little pessimistic when it comes to AI, but I like how you brought, because I didn't even see the chapter that way until you brought it up to me, because he is a little bit nervous about what AI brings. But from a career standpoint, yes, he's a perfect example of getting over that anxiety and embracing that change. And now I think in his consulting company, he's now moved from ECM, which we know was the early days of content management, now into AI and auto classification and some of this newer stuff.
And such a brilliant and just a nice guy as well. I absolutely adore Dr. Kampfmeyer. And we're running over time here, but I think that's okay as long as you're okay with continuing the conversation, Rafael. Your last section of the book is called Relationships Matter. And this is something that I've been grappling with lately. You might have heard it in some of the previous conversations in the podcast. In addition, in the introduction to the section, you talk about the story of the Seattle Chieftains. And they're this poorly funded college basketball team who in 1952 set against the backdrop of all these Jim Crow laws, which were popping up everywhere at the time and adhered to. They built this diverse basketball team comprised of white, black, Jewish, Catholic, everybody, just the best players they could find. And that's something that people didn't do at the time. And they went on to compete in the NCAA and national invitation tournaments, where they had success well beyond what they should have had. And it was because of their relationships and diversity. And I'm going to get into the weighty stuff. As a white male, I'm calling myself out. As a white male, I've had success because I recognize that, yes, relationships matter. But we, both myself and yourself, and if I'm to be completely transparent, have a level of privilege in our relationships because of race. And there are long-standing presuppositions about us that have nothing to do with us individually, really. I can read between your lines here as you were writing the introduction to this section, so I could see your commitment here, but how can we make sure that relationships matter not just for people who look like us, but making relationships matter more for all, irrespective of race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, all of the labels, you know?
Well, the relationships matter, and thanks for bringing it up with in terms of this kind of historical story, because this is 1952. My father was Jewish, and he was the only Jewish member of the Catholic squad. They became a great team. They kind of blew it in round one of the NIT.
But they made it.
Yeah, but they came together. There's a great photograph of them in Madison Square Garden, kind of running together. I'll share that with you, and if you want to share that with your viewers.
Oh, I absolutely do.
Picture. But I think the environment that the university created at that time kind of empowered them. There was a famous priest there who, was. It's not that they were. It's not that athletics were just kind of the end all be all, and they were willing to kind of look past people's religion. They really did have a great community, a great feel for what how things were, and it was the personality. It was kind of like the bravery of that one Catholic priest who kind of brought my dad in at a time where, gosh, what is this Jewish guy doing at this Catholic university? And he also brought in some other people, an Asian man and an African American man named Oscar Holden, to join. And as they kind of traveled through the South and on their journey, they came across some really serious discrimination. But it was that athletic play that kind of stripped things away, that created that glue. They had to stay together. And for example, when they went into a movie theater, sometimes they'd be discriminated against. They all refused to go into the movie theater then. Then they, nobody would go into the movie theater. It was the same at restaurants and things like that. But Seattle had also had a lot of, had made a lot of progress too in race relations. But again, I just think that everybody has a part to play in that, and especially with the university at the time, it was important for everybody to feel accepted. And I feel that kind of the principles that were laid down at that university enabled that. The same with the book. Is that building each other up is critical. Mentorship is critical, and I think as we kind of grapple with some of these issues too, we really have to think about all of them. We also have to think about merit. We have to think about the best people, to fill these positions as well. But at the end of the day, we're all here. Business is about people. At the end of the day, the work can wait. What's important is that the relationships are there, and that we feel like we're growing and we're kind to each other. And we're helping each other, through the days of this world.
I love that, and you've really lived it in this book, because you and Abby, in authoring this and selecting the people that you've had these amazing conversations with, you really have pulled from a diverse group of individuals, people who are doing work in all parts of the world and represent all backgrounds. So I just wanted to give you some kudos on the representation that exists within the book. In your epilogue of Tomorrow's Jobs Today, you have some really brilliant words, and I sort of just stopped on that. You had a thumb stop page where I just stayed on that very last page for quite some time. You say, "We can't know exactly what the jobs of the future will look like, but the chances are that both the technical and soft skills examined in this book will serve as a basis for their qualifications. Like the leaders profiled in these chapters, each of us has a valuable contribution to make to that future and each other." And Rafael, obviously, you continue on that for a moment in closing the book, but can you speak to the valuable contributions that each of us has to make in our collective futures? How do we build this together?
Well, I don't want to throw this off to another resource, but in building this body of knowledge, Nick, we looked a lot towards the World Economic Forum and we looked towards many of the skills that they had identified as rising, and the majority of them are soft skills, like cognitive flexibility, emotional intelligence, empathy, and things like that. And then going back to what we talked about in terms of changing this feeling of anxiety and the winds of change into opportunity, collectively, as something that information impacting all of us, we have everything to bring to this game. We're not in the same jobs for 30, 40 years like it used to be. If people are stuck like that, it's just too bad. I mean, it's unfortunate. I know we will have industries that maintain that, but people should be looking to grow, because as we grow in our careers, we can also bring a lot of that back to our home, and vice versa. Yeah. If we divide our time into 3 parts, between rest and work and sleep, that work part is a big piece of our life. So it should become a welcome place, and we should feel free to be ourselves at those workplaces. And I think as we're moving into these new environments, Nick, I think it's probably a net positive that we're getting to know each other a lot better, and that we're loosening up maybe a little bit, and that we're helping each other along. My career has been improved and driven by the individuals in this book, and people like the individuals in this book. Falling into the information management space, like so many of us did, has been transformative, rewarding. And so, to your point, we don't know what those jobs of the future look like, but we'll all get through it together, and we'll all be supportive of each other. And those that don't want to can hit the road.
Yeah, and the opportunities won't exist for them.
That's right.
I love the book. It's called Tomorrow's Jobs Today. But before I let you go, Rafael, we've got a fun closing segment. That's a newer segment. It's called On the Spot. All right?
Okay.
I've got 10 questions for you, and you give me one-word answers as quickly as possible. I know we're gonna have some fun with it.
Yeah.
But just give the first answer that pops into your head. All right, okay. Rafael Moscatel, are you ready?
No, but that's all right.
All right, ready?
Yeah.
Favorite flavor of ice cream?
Pistachio.
Ooh, good answer. Rice or pasta?
Both.
Oh, good answer. These are good answers. Cake or pie?
Cake.
All right. Dream vacation destination that you haven't been to yet. I know you travel a bit, but somewhere you haven't gone to yet.
Oh, India.
All right.
Yeah.
Which of Snow White's 7 dwarfs do you most associate with?
Well, because I have a bunch of kids, probably Sleepy.
Favorite hobby?
Favorite hobby is kayaking lately.
Interesting. All right. Favorite cartoon character?
Elmer Fudd.
Brilliant. If you could have any superpower, what would you choose to have?
Well, this might seem kind of creepy, but I'd like to be able to see through things, because if my kids are doing something, they shouldn't be doing in the other room, I can, surprise them and be like, oh, what the hell? It's Dad.
This is like X-ray bonus parenting over there.
We're good. We're good.
And, okay, number 9. If you're hitting the bar, what's your go-to drink order?
Oh, they make a Moscow Mule out here with huckleberry that people come from all over the state to drink. So it'll have to be
that sounds incredible. And this last one I chose because of your time running the information management at Paramount Pictures. What's your favorite Paramount Pictures movie?
I gotta give you 2, okay?
Deal.
The official one, which is kind of a bland answer, is The Godfather. I think you can find all the wisdom in the world from The Godfather. But if you haven't seen, you can't take it with you. Which is kind of goes back to this theme that we're talking about, what it really means in life. Go see it. It's a great film from I want to say early 1930s. You can't take it with you.
So you can't take it with you, and The Godfather, who's going to make you take something with you.
He'll take
He'll take it.
Yes.
Well, Rafael, Thank you so much. Your new best-selling book is called Tomorrow's Jobs Today. It's a great read. I really urge our listeners to pick up a copy, preferably from your local independent bookseller or wherever you buy your books. Rafael, absolute honor having you on the Strategy of Information. We'll have to have you on again just to chat when we're not talking about a specific book, and just talk about your career and things that you're thinking of these days.
Great to be with you, Nick, and thanks for having me on.
I hope that this wide-ranging conversation with Rafael Moscatel was helpful in bringing your future a bit more clearly into focus. It certainly has for me. There aren't a ton of conversations that range from pistachio ice cream to a deep dive on microfinance, but wow, when you've got a guest like Rafael, it makes it really easy. So a huge thank you to Rafael Moscatel, and also a thank you to you for tuning in today. I love conversations like this, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation with Colligo CEO and former financial research analyst in the space, Tim Brady. We'll be talking about the financial prospects of the information profession, the growth of his firm Colligo, and how Tim just couldn't sit on the sidelines of this incredible information profession. It's a fascinating and rare discussion about the growth and financial potential of the information profession, as well as a glimpse behind the curtain at one of the fastest growing software companies in the space, Colligo. Until then, I wish you the absolute best in all of your information endeavors.
The Strategy of Information is listener and sponsor-supported programming. Subscribing to the podcast is free, but supporters gain access to every episode in HD video, bonus episodes, the occasional extended interview, merch like tote bags and stickers, and so much more. Head to infogov.net to learn more about supporting the program. Corporate sponsorship options are now available for Season 2 of The Strategy of Information. The Strategy of Information with Nick Inglis is available on podcast platforms everywhere and online at infogov.net. This has been a production of infogov.net.